The wind carried a chill through Harlow, Indiana, rustling the brittle leaves that clung to the trees lining Main Street. It was late October, and the town felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something to stir it back to life. At the edge of town stood the Harlow Steelworks factory, its rusted gates chained shut, its smokestacks piercing the gray sky like silent sentinels of a bygone era. For decades, it had been the heartbeat of this small Midwest community, employing generations of men and women who built lives on the promise of steady work. Now, it was a hollow shell, and with it, the town's spirit seemed to fade. Jack Thompson felt that fade more than most. At 45, he was a man forged by hard work, broad-shouldered with hands roughened by years on the factory floor. His dark hair was streaked with gray, and his hazel eyes carried a weariness that hadn't been there a year ago. He'd spent 20 years at Steelworks, following in his father's footsteps, welding beams and hauling steel until his back ached and his pride swelled. But 6 months ago, the layoffs hit, and Jack's name was on the list. No warning, no severance, just a handshake and a good luck from a manager who wouldn't meet his gaze. Now Jack sat at the kitchen table in the modest two-story home he shared with his family. The morning sun filtered through faded curtains, casting weak light across the scratched oak surface. A cup of watery coffee sat untouched in front of him, steam curling upward like a ghost of better days. Beside it lay the newspaper, its help-wanted section circled in red ink. Jobs he'd already applied for, jobs that never called back. His wife Mary stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal for their kids. She was 42, with soft brown hair, pulled into a loose bun and a quiet strength that held their family together. Her job as a third-grade teacher kept the lights on, but it wasn't enough. Not with a mortgage, 2 kids, and a husband who felt like he was drowning. Anything. "Today?" Mary asked, her voice gentle but edged with the strain they both felt. Jack shook his head, staring at the paper. "Same as yesterday. Warehouses, truck driving, nothing I haven't tried." She turned off the burner and crossed the room, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm, steadying. "Something will come up, Jack. It always does." He wanted to believe her. He nodded, forcing a smile, but the doubt gnawed at him. Their daughter Emily, 16 and sharp as a tack, wanted to go to college. Maybe Purdue if they could swing it. Their son, Ben, 10 and full of boundless energy, still thought his dad could fix anything with a wrench and a grin. Jack had always been the provider, the rock. Now he felt like a man crumbling under his own weight. "Maybe I'll head to the diner," he said, pushing back his chair. "See if Mrs. Jenkins needs a hand." Mary's eyes softened. "That's a good idea. She's always had a soft spot. For you." The Sunrise Diner sat at the heart of Harlow, a squat brick building with a neon sign that flickered more than it glowed. Inside it was a time capsule. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s, and walls plastered with photos of Little League teams and 4th of July parades. The air smelled of coffee and frying bacon, a comforting hum that greeted Jack as he pushed open the door, the bell jingling overhead. Mrs. Jenkins looked up from behind the counter, her silver hair swept into a neat bun, her apron dusted with flour. At 70, she moved with the spry energy of someone. Half her age, her blue eyes sharp and kind. She'd run the diner since her husband passed 20 years ago, and she'd known Jack since he was a boy sneaking in for a root beer float. "Well, if it isn't Jack Thompson," she said, her voice carrying a lilt of warmth. "Come for your usual? Bacon, eggs, toast?" Jack slid onto a stool, resting his elbows on the counter. "Not today, Mrs. Jenkins. Actually, I was wondering if you needed any help around here. Odd jobs, maybe? I could use the work." She paused, wiping her hands on a rag, and studied him. Her gaze softened, seeing past the question to the man behind it. "You know, Jack, I've been thinking about hiring someone for the breakfast rush. These old bones aren't what they used to be." He knew it was a lie. The diner was quieter than ever, the factory's closure rippling through every business in town. But her offer was a lifeline, and pride be damned, he wasn't about to let it slip away. "I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Jenkins, really." She waved a hand, brushing off his gratitude. "Nonsense, you're doing me a favor. Start tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp." For the first time in months, Jack felt a spark of something. Hope, maybe, or at least a reason to set his alarm. It wasn't the factory, wasn't the life he'd known, but it was a start. The next morning, Jack arrived before dawn. The sky, still dark as he unlocked the diner with the key Mrs. Jenkins had pressed into his hand. He flipped on the lights, the hum of the fluorescent bulbs mingling with the quiet. He brewed the first pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the space, and started prepping, cracking eggs, slicing bacon, firing up the griddle. By the time the regulars trickled in, farmers in worn overalls, truck drivers bleary-eyed from the night shift, he was in motion, flipping pancakes and pouring refills with a rhythm that felt almost familiar. The work was simple, but it steadied him. He bantered with the old-timers, listened to their stories of better days, and found himself smiling more than he had in months. Mrs. Jenkins watched from the sidelines, her approval quiet but clear. Slowly, Jack began to feel like a piece of himself was coming back, not the factory man he'd been, but something new, something he couldn't yet name. At home, things eased a little too. The extra cash wasn't much, but it paid for Ben's soccer cleats and a new backpack for Emily. Mary noticed the change in him, the way he carried himself a bit taller, and she started humming again while she cooked dinner. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One rainy afternoon, 3 weeks into his new routine, Jack was wiping down the counter when the bell jingled, and a young woman stepped inside. She was soaked, her thin jacket clinging to her slight frame, her dark hair plastered to her face. In her arms, she carried a small child bundled in a blanket, no more than 4 years old. The woman's eyes were red-rimmed, her shoulders hunched with exhaustion. Mrs. Jenkins greeted her warmly. "Sarah, dear, come in out of the rain. What can I get you?" The woman, Sarah, managed a faint smile. "Just a coffee, please, and maybe some toast for Lily." Jack watched as Sarah settled into a booth near the window, unwrapping the blanket to reveal a little girl with pale skin and tired eyes. Lily clutched a stuffed rabbit, her small frame swallowed by an oversized sweatshirt. Something about them tugged at Jack. A memory of Emily at that age, or maybe the raw vulnerability in Sarah's face. He brought over the coffee and toast, setting them down with a nod. As he turned to walk away, he caught snippets of their conversation. Sarah's voice low and trembling, Mrs. Jenkins' tone soothing. "I don't know what to do," Sarah was saying, her hands wrapped around the mug as if it were the only thing anchoring her. "The hospital bills are piling up and I can't afford the treatment. Lily needs surgery. Her heart, they say it's a defect. Without insurance, I'm out of options." Mrs. Jenkins reached across the table, her wrinkled hand covering Sarah's. "We'll figure something out, sweetheart. Harlow takes care of its own." Jack's chest tightened. He knew that desperation, the suffocating weight of failing the people you loved. He'd felt it every day since the factory closed. Every time he saw Mary's worried frown, every time Ben asked why they couldn't afford cable anymore. But Sarah's burden was heavier, her stakes higher. A sick child, a single mother, no safety net. It hit him like a punch. That night, Jack lay awake beside Mary, the rain drumming against the roof. Sarah and Lily haunted his thoughts. The little girl's pale face, Sarah's quiet despair. He didn't have much to give, not with his own family stretched thin. But doing nothing felt wrong, like turning his back on a part of himself. By morning, an idea had taken root. He arrived at the diner early, finding Mrs. Jenkins in the kitchen rolling out dough for her famous cinnamon rolls. The air smelled of yeast and sugar, a comfort that steadied his nerves. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, leaning against the counter, "I've got an idea, but I need your help." She looked up, brushing flour from her hands. "What's on your mind, Jack?" He took a breath, the words tumbling out. "You remember that old community pot we used to have? The jar where folks left spare change for someone in need?" She nodded, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Sure do. It's been a while, but it's still around here somewhere. What if we brought it back, but bigger? What if we turned the diner into a fundraiser for Sarah and Lily? Food, music, maybe a raffle. Get the whole town involved. People here are generous, they just need a nudge." Mrs. Jenkins's face lit up, a slow smile spreading. "Jack Thompson, that's a wonderful idea. Let's do it." The next few days were a whirlwind. Jack dove into planning with a focus he hadn't felt since the factory days. He called old friends, knocked on doors, pitched the idea to anyone who'd listen. Mrs. Jenkins handled the diner logistics, borrowing tables, stringing up lights, coordinating with the cooks. Word spread fast in a town like Harlow, where gossip traveled quicker than the wind. The response was staggering. The bakery offered trays of cookies and pies. The high school band volunteered to play, their director eager to give the kids a stage. The hardware store pledged 10% of their weekend sales, and the VFW hall donated folding chairs. Even the mayor stopped by with a promise to match the first $100 raised. It was as if Harlow had been waiting for a reason to wake up. Jack enlisted Emily and Ben too. Emily designed flyers on her laptop, her artistic streak shining, threw in bold colors and clean lines. Ben stuffed envelopes and handed out posters, his enthusiasm infectious. Mary watched it all with quiet pride, her belief in Jack growing with every step he took. The night of the fundraiser arrived crisp and clear, the sky a deep indigo dotted with stars. The diner glowed with warmth, its windows fogged from the heat of bodies packed inside. Strings of white lights crisscrossed the ceiling, and the jukebox had been coaxed back to life, crooning Johnny Cash and Patsy Cline. Outside, a makeshift stage stood under a tent, where the high school band tuned their instruments, their notes mingling with the scent of barbecue wafting from a grill manned by the fire chief. Jack stood at the door, greeting folks as they arrived. Farmers in flannel, teachers with their kids, factory workers he hadn't seen since the closure. They all came, their faces bright with purpose. The diner buzzed with life, laughter echoing off the walls, the clink of coins hitting the community, caught a steady rhythm beneath it all. Sarah arrived midway through, Lily in her arms, both of them wide-eyed at the scene. Jack caught her gaze across the room and made his way over, weaving through the crowd. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice soft against the noise. Sarah blinked back tears, clutching Lily closer. "I don't know what to say, Jack. It's more than I ever dreamed." He smiled, a real one that reached his eyes. "You don't have to say anything. Just know you're not alone." The night unfolded like a dream. The band played a mix of country and rock. Kids danced in the aisles, and the raffle table groaned under the weight of donated prizes. A quilt from Mrs. Carter, a fishing rod from the bait shop, a gift card to the grocery store. By midnight, the pot overflowed with cash and checks, and Mrs. Jenkins announced the total: $12,000. Enough for Lily's surgery, with some left over for the bills. Sarah broke down then, sobbing into Mrs. Jenkins' shoulder as the crowd cheered. Lily, nestled in her mother's lap, clapped her small hands, a spark of color returning to her cheeks. Jack watched from the sidelines, his throat tight with something he couldn't name: relief, pride, maybe redemption. As the last guests drifted out, Jack sank onto a stool at the counter, the adrenaline fading into a bone-deep exhaustion. Mrs. Jenkins slid a cup of coffee in front of him, her own eyes glassy with emotion. "You did good, Jack," she said, her voice low and sure. "Real good." He shook his head, staring into the black liquid. "It wasn't just me, it was everyone." "That's true," she said, resting a hand on his arm. "But you were the spark. Sometimes that's all it takes." He took a sip, letting the warmth seep into him. For months he'd felt lost, a man unmoored by a life he no longer recognized. But tonight he'd found something, a purpose bigger than himself, a tether to the town he loved. In the weeks that followed, Harlow didn't go back to sleep. Lily's surgery was scheduled, and Sarah sent Jack a card with a photo of her daughter, smiling in a hospital bed, the stuffed rabbit still clutched tight. The diner became a hub again, not just for coffee and eggs, but for connection. Jack took over the community pot, turning it into a regular fund, $5 here, $10 there, enough to help with a utility bill or a kid's school supplies. He started dreaming bigger too. With Mary's encouragement, he sketched plans for a small repair shop, fixing lawnmowers, bikes, anything folks brought him. The diner had taught him he could start over, and the fundraiser had shown him he wasn't alone in it. One morning, as winter crept closer, Jack sat at the counter watching the sun rise over Harlow. The streets were quiet, the factory still a shadow in the distance. But the town felt alive again, its pulse steady in the people who called it home. Jack thought of Sarah and Lily, of Mrs. Jenkins' quiet faith, of his family's unwavering love. He'd lost a job, a piece of who he'd been, but in its place he'd found something enduring. He wasn't just a man who'd fallen on hard times. He was a man who'd risen, not alone, but with a community that lifted him as he lifted them. And as the first light touched the diner's windows, Jack knew Harlow would be okay. So would he.